podcast.
Welcome back
It makes no sense.
Oh, are we shooting the show now? Okay.
to the Social Web TV.
Open Web Edition.
Dude, iPhone is better edition.
Closed down, Cocoa, one thing at a time.
It-
Sorry,
it-
okay.
You guys got
yeah.
new hardware?
Yeah, it's great. Oh, plus keyboard.
Which
Game
one?
over.
My virtual keyboard is twice as large as his
If you can find the
real
keys.
Which one's better?
iPhone.
Yeah, the Pre. I mean, the Pre is really everything the Social Web TV stands for. The iPhone is kind of, the opposite.
I'm sorry, but our show does not stand for sucking.
Oh, interesting. Well, we both make good points.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like we're at some kind of major transition point here. We've been doing the show for about a year, and we really got started thinking about how can we contribute to a revolution, change the web, and make the web social and make the social web go open. In a lot of ways, I feel like that's happened. And so increasingly what this show should be about is, what is this new social web? How are people using it? And how can it make us better, make our lives better?
Well,
So-
we saw that a little bit with the last episode with Lewis Gray,
Yep.
where he was talking about how he was using all these different social media tools sort of very much as an early adopter, but then being able to bring some of those ideas back to a more mainstream audience as well.
Well, this industry continues to, innovate at such a rapid pace that I think the main reason we started this show back in the day was sort of saying there's a lot of people who care about this space, but it's hard enough to follow it if you do it every day, let alone if you're just sort of trying to dip in and stay up. And so I think in that spirit of things, even though the content may shift, hopefully the value we're providing is the same.
And one of the things I definitely want to get to cover today will be what's going on in Iran and how social media is playing a role there. But why don't we start first with really a sign of the times. Kevin Marks is leaving Google.
Yeah, Kevin was one of the really earliest advocates of this opening up the social web, and even before that involved in microformats and some of these early attempts to really have these open, lightweight standards for the web, and done a lot. I mean, personally, I most think about, we started doing some very early work, even before the days of Open Social, about standards for sharing contact information that would eventually become portable contacts. And he's done so much to help not only inside Google, but outside. One of that sort of role I can feel certain affinity to, of sort of working both sides of the coin. And in a way, apropos of what we were just saying earlier, I think what Kevin said leaving is, well, gee, I tried to help build a social team in Google and get them to understand open standards, and by golly, I've succeeded, and there's really nothing left for me to do there. So now I'm going to go build something that uses all of this infrastructure that's been built up. And that is that sort of sign of the times and sign of success in a way.
Yeah, and seeing it beyond just Google's technologies as well, but having all sorts of applications which are going and letting you sign in with accounts you already have, going and being able to interact with friends without having to go and have refriend madness the entire time. Continuing that virtuous cycle of activity sharing. So when you sign into a site, being able to share your activities back to sort of social network aggregators, sending traffic back and forth, and all of those things that really weren't possible a year ago now are, and allow you to build even more interesting social applications on the web.
I guess on that note, I guess you guys won't see it, but I'll be speaking tonight at Mozilla Labs exactly about that. And Mozilla obviously has got this, support the open web, right? It sort of came more from web standards, but clearly that same affinity of we need to have a platform we can all innovate on and all benefit from the way the web sort of took off in its early days. So
Do you have a special wardrobe for every company that you speak at?
Well, they gave me this dinosaur shirt last time I spoke there about, in that case, about high-performance JavaScript. So I feel there's only so many chances you can whip out the Mozilla dinosaur shirt and have it resonate with the crowd. So couldn't pass that opportunity up.
But so would you say Mozilla is the one really trying to unite the open web?
Interesting
nice.
choice of segues. Yeah, so another interesting piece of development.
What the heck was that?
So,
I still don't know.
well,
I was hoping you guys could explain it.
most eloquently
Opera
described by
Unite.
our
Yeah, Opera Unite.
Opera Unite, most eloquently described by our prodigal son of a missing panelist, Chris Messina. But so Opera is a web browser company, and they've actually they've been a very innovative company. Never had a large market share, but done a lot to sort of push what's possible with web browsers, and made a lot of fanfare this time around this new platform called Opera Unite, which essentially allows you to take your web browser and turn it into a web server. So if you've got files or movies or music or whatever on your home computer that you want to share with other people, the idea is rather than uploading that to some service in the cloud, why not just serve it directly off of your own computer? And it got a lot of attention because they made a lot of sort of fanfare about how this was, using actually a lot of the open web rhetoric, sort of don't be locked into these social networks or websites, serve your own content out of your own site. Now that leaves out a little bit of the details that it actually all goes through Opera's servers, so it's in fact quite centralized, and that everybody's upload speed is terrible compared to the speeds that these cloud services can offer. But it's still a neat sort of building block, and it kind of makes the point, I think, that we are in this incredibly connected world where everyone really can be both a producer and a consumer. And so I think in that sense, it's an interesting
Yeah,
development.
I mean, some of what they were trying to do is go and sort of put a browser UI on top of your documents and your music and your friends and all photos and all that sort of stuff, so that as you're interacting with different, well, okay, I guess my vision of it would be that what they really should have done was instead of trying to make the argument that it's evil to use cloud services, that you shouldn't go and store your photos in Facebook or on Flickr, but have the browser really be that interface that you use for interacting with these cloud services. And so instead of having a difference between using Google Docs and using Zoho for writing documents online, letting the browser sort of abstract that away. But that's not really what they did. What they did was sort of much more, and I think it stemmed a lot from European influence within the Opera team, of going and really saying you should host all of your own data, it should be on your computer, you should be able to access it from anywhere. Which makes a lot of sense from, I think, a lot of the conceptual argument perspective, but in terms of how they actually went about solving it, I don't think that many people really actually care that much that their content is served directly from their computer. I think they care much more about that they're able to access it from whatever service it's stored in, that they're able to control who else accesses it, move it around, create mashups, all those sorts of things. And as Joseph said, it's like, most people don't have great broadband connections. I mean, I'm certainly sure that the pipe Flickr has to and from the internet is a bunch better than the Comcast pipe I have at home.
Although Comcast is providing quite higher speed bandwidth than I was able to get before I was a Comcast.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then also
full disclosure there, but yeah.
Even though, like, with Opera Unite, you don't have to have Opera's proxy servers sort of sitting in between your computer and everyone else. The majority of users have firewalls set up, and like, you have to put Opera in the middle. So
It's kind of interesting, though, the way that they wrapped this announcement up in such
Populist
overblown
rhetoric, yeah.
of a revolution, and contrast that with what is going on in Iran right now, which is one of the things I wanted to get to, which is there may be an actual revolution underway. We don't know. It could just be a set of demonstrations and protests, but there we see extreme cases of people wanting to get stuff out and really using cloud services of various sorts to get the word out. So.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly, again, Mozilla and Opera and all that, sort of the role of web browsers in all of this, I think, is a more interesting story that has yet to unfold fully. So there's certainly a lot of potential there.
Especially then with things like Jolly Cloud, experimenting with sort of making your entire operating system built into the web versus even needing the browser as well.
Yeah, you get richer and richer clients at the same time as more and more in the cloud, so one isn't necessarily replacing the other, but it's certainly an interesting dynamic to watch.
So Joseph, you wanted to talk about Twitter and kind of revolutionary context?
Yeah, well, I just think, if you think about social media and you think about, empowering people to make sure that information gets shared even when there are powerful interests that don't want that information to be shared, but, letting the individual sort of usurp that power and go directly with the information. I think there's no more powerful example than recently what happened with Shaq being traded to the Cavaliers and finding out on Twitter.
What are you talking about?
David, could you do a dramatic reading here?
So last night there was a tweet which said, "At the real Shaq, is it true you a Cleveland Cavalier?" Sorry, I need to read in my Ebonics voice. And then the real Shaq saying back, "At Allison, I didn't hear that yet." And then back from DJ Tree, "At real Shaq, you Cleveland bound. Shaq found out he was traded through Twitter. Laughed my ass off. Ha 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 ha." And then the real Shaq saying back, "At DJ Tree, I know, right?"
He actually got scooped about his own trade because of Twitter. And
I need a new agent there.
I can't think of anything more powerful, except possibly what's happening in Iran.
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you are following this through a variety of sources, including now traditional media, but traditional media trying to cover this
With
stuff
all the reporters
unfolding.
being exiled.
In many ways, it's like CNN is essentially retweeting the revolution.
It's sort of the opposite of the Daily Show segment, I think, a week or so ago, where they were at the New York Times, and the New York Times managing editor was like, "Well, I don't see the Huffington Post in Iraq."
Sweet. So, I mean, what's happening right now? We're not going to get into the politics of it, but clearly there is a major disagreement between the government, the regime, and folks who believe that this election was rigged. And so the folks who believe it was rigged are trying to get a new election, and they're using all of the traditional techniques, demonstrations, protests, and all of that. Plus, they're trying to get the word out. And as the regime sees this word getting out, they're cracking down with violence against the demonstrators. And so those of us who are passionately interested in what's going on there are able to follow it, not so much through the newspaper, but through social media as a new kind of lens into that. So Twitter, Flickr, YouTube, all of these are now our best window into what's going on there.
I just think it's fascinating too that if you think about all the work that's happened in Web 2.0 to make it easier for people to share content and videos, photos, etc. Mostly that was motivated through sort of reducing the friction for sort of mainstream users for whom the technology is too cumbersome or too complicated. But that same innovation in terms of how do you make it really easy and seamless to do this is exactly what's made it possible for these people who are being repressed and want to get this information out to be able to do it. So I think that's such an interesting validation of that fundamental value that's been created by all these companies of really going and making something more universal that isn't just fun but can be fundamental to a major social change.
Well, and really seeing that with the Twitter usage of all sorts of people going and using Twitter in a much more anonymous fashion.
Yeah.
Of being able to sort of provide updates about what's going on, using Twitter via direct messages to sort of communicate things like open proxies that still work.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of 1-2 punch that's happening with some social media there. Not only that they're using these social media tools to get the word out, but then of course the government is trying to block access to those sites. And so what people do is they set up these proxies, it looks like a normal web server, but actually it just redirects traffic outside to Twitter or whatever. And then the question is, how do you learn where those proxy servers are? And they're, of course, using social media to communicate where those proxies are, so sharing messages over Facebook and so forth. And it kind of makes the whole thing a bit of a cat and mouse game, but ultimately one that's very hard to stop.
Well, also sort of interesting, I think, looking at that difference between Twitter, where it's very easy to be anonymous, and Facebook, where they've really focused on using your real identity.
Yeah.
In fact, when I mentioned the tools, I explicitly did not mention Facebook, and Facebook's clearly being used. It's just the ones I mentioned are the ones where you can easily hide behind a fake name or a fake avatar.
Well, and there's probably also like different use cases for Twitter versus Facebook, where Twitter you really do want to be anonymous, you want to be able to sort of share information in a broad sense, whereas in Facebook actually having some of that real identity when you're talking to someone else gives you a much better idea of do they work for the government or are they actually someone that I should listen to?
And in particular, the candidate who believes that he actually won, Mousavi, has a Facebook page, and that is essentially the one authoritative source of information coming from him. And then there's a lot of folks who are involved who are using Twitter as their primary communications tool, and they're hoping that their real identity is not discovered. I was talking about this with my dad the other day, and he was like, how are you actually following all of these events in Iran? So I thought maybe I'd share how you do that if that might be of interest to people.
Sure.
So basically one of the most powerful things in Twitter is search, which allows you to see everything that's public based on some kind of keywords. So if you go to search.twitter.com, you'll see the trending topics, so the most popular things that people are talking about on Twitter at the moment. Iran election has been in the number 1, 2, or 3 slot for the last 2 weeks. So if you click on that, you'll see this incredible river of stuff going by at this rate of like thousands an hour. Now, the difficulty is to get the signal out of all of that noise, because it's a mixture of people around the world who are just retweeting whatever they see, government agents who are putting misinformation into the stream, and a very small number of people who are in Iran, very knowledgeable about what's going on, and are trying to get the word out to the rest of the world and get the word spread within the country, like, hey, there's officially going to be a demonstration at this time and at this place. So that's my best advice. I won't tell you here the names of the trusted sources, because a lot of people are saying let's not spread those too broadly, but if you do a little bit of digging, you'll probably be able to figure it out on your own.
Well, and you do know that the revolution will be Twitter biased.
Yes.
It certainly seems that way.
Revolution in 140 characters or less. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's going on.
Yeah. So I hope that you will agree that this is another example of how all of this stuff that we've been talking about is really going mainstream and really having an impact on how people are using technology to make the world a better place. So join us, not necessarily next week, whenever we feel like it, for another exciting episode of the Social Web TV!
I iPhone's still better.